I love Star Trek. It's one of the most unique fandoms, since it features multiple different properties within the same universe. Don't get me wrong, I do love Star Wars, but there's just something about Star Trek that raises it to another level. There's so many shows that are unique in their own ways. Shows such as Star Trek, the original series, the animated series, The Next Generation, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, Strange New Worlds, Prodigy, Lower Decks, and Star Trek Picard. Then of course you have the movies such as Shut Up All of You! Okay, the point is there's something for everyone in the Star Trek fandom. I also think that its fans are a little bit less toxic than other fandoms. My theory is because there's so many shows out there that there's at least one that everyone can agree on is good. So if someone were to, let's say, hate Prodigy, they may like Lower Decks. Or maybe they think Next Generation is the only good Star Trek show. But because there's so many series, there is a better chance for fans to link their loves together. I have met many Trekkers within my life, and I have yet to meet someone who I have nothing in common with. But one Star Trek show that I loved that tended to divide the fans was Deep Space Nine. I, for one, adored this show, maybe because it broke all the rules. It wasn't about a ship, and they didn't go out looking for adventure. Instead, adventure would come to them. There was more emphasis on characters instead of technobabble. It was Star Trek noir, and I loved almost every episode. But does it still hold up, or am I still under some sort of alien virus? Let us find out, so pull up a chair at the best bar in the galaxy and talk about the most famous space station within the Federation, in this episode of Gone, but Not Forgotten. Star Trek Deep Space Nine was created by the late Michael Piller and Rick Berman, both of whom have had long careers in the Star Trek universe. Rick Berman would help develop Star Trek The Next Generation with Gene Roddenberry and Maurice Hurley. He was the man behind Star Trek for many years, creating not only Deep Space Nine, but also the Voyager and Enterprise series. Berman is a controversial figure within the Star Trek universe. I would go into this more, but that is an entire video unto itself. Michael Piller, on the other hand, was a legend in the Star Trek community. He was head writer on Next Generation and would eventually become its showrunner. Many have said that Piller was responsible for the success of Next Generation when he got the position. Again, if I went over Piller's Star Trek career, that would be yet another episode. Man, maybe I should start making some Star Trek videos. Anyway, during Next Generation, Berman and Piller were approached by a network executive to create another Star Trek show that would air while Next Gen was still on the air. Who was that executive? Why, it was the man, the myth, the legend, Brandon Tartikoff. Many regular viewers of Gone But Not Forgotten know who Brandon Tartikoff is, because he was the man behind such amazing shows as Night Court, Knight Rider, Miami Vice, and many more. Deep Space Nine is yet another feather in this man's cap, and when it came to DS9, Tartikoff had one order. The new show would not revolve around another starship exploring the universe. It would be a new kind of Star Trek show, where the adventures would be stationary. According to the Season 2 DVD special feature New Frontiers, the story of Deep Space Nine, the original idea that was batted around was to have the show based on a colony or planet. But shooting on location would have been too expensive. Plus fans wanted to see a show in space, not a planet. So it was decided the series would take place on a space station. In the beginning, Star Trek was pitched as a space western in the vein of Wagon Train. So since Deep Space Nine was a space station, it would be more like an old western town, evoking shows such as the classic 50s western series, The Rifleman. Now, I'd like to take a minute here to talk about the elephant in the room. During this time, famous science fiction writer J. Michael Straczynski had been pitching a new science fiction series called Babylon 5. This show would revolve around characters on a space station that featured unique aliens with long and interesting storylines, focusing on the character relationships and serialized stories. JM would go to many studios pitching the show, and one of them would be Paramount. Straczynski used his show Bible in his proposal, and Paramount kept it, even after they rejected his pitch. Then a few years later, coincidentally, a Star Trek show based on a space station was put into production. Fans of both shows have debated whether or not Deep Space Nine ripped off Babylon 5. JM has stated that he doesn't believe that Berman and Piller stole his ideas, but he does believe that it's possible that his proposal was what inspired the idea for a Star Trek show on a space station. But is that true? Paramounts have denied it, and even though the shows are similar, they both are unique enough that it separates them from each other. Did the executives copy Straczynski's pitch when they commissioned Berman and Piller to make the show? I don't think we will ever know. Anyway, let's get into the concept of the series, shall we? The fascist alien race called the Cardassians have waged a brutal war against the spiritual Bajorans. The Cardassians used the Bajorans as slave labor and plundered their planet of Bajor, but the Bajorans won the war via guerrilla warfare and took over the Cardassians' space station, which orbits the homeworld of Bajor. An alliance is formed between Bajor and the Federation, and the station is renamed Deep Space Nine, with both governments assigning representatives to run it. In the first episode, a wormhole is discovered that links the Alpha Quadrant and the Gamma Quadrant, two galaxies that are 70,000 light-years away from each other. Not only that, but the beings that the Bajorans worship as gods, which they call the Prophets, are discovered to live within this wormhole. Due to his involvement in the discovery, Commander Benjamin Sisko is dubbed the emissary of the Prophets by the Bajorans. Because of the wormhole, DS9 becomes the hub of trade, exploration, and political machinations. Deep Space Nine was unique in the characters featured on the show. The main cast would feature Commander, or later Captain, Benjamin Sisko. His second-in-command and Bajoran military liaison is Kira Nerys, who was a former guerrilla fighter. Jadzia Dax is the station's chief science officer, and is also an alien belonging to the species called the Trill. Dr. Julian Bashir is the chief medical officer, who's a bit egotistical. Odo, the chief of security, is an alien from the mysterious race called the Changelings. Miles O'Brien is the station's chief operations officer and former transporter chief on the Enterprise. Finally, Quark, a bar owner on the station who is obsessed with making profits with various schemes, most of which are illegal. Other characters that populate the stations are Jake Sisko, Commander Sisko's son, Keiko O'Brien, Miles' wife, Garak, a former Cardassian spy, now Taylor living in exile, among many others. This show was character-based, each of whom would slowly be fleshed out as the series went on. This wasn't just the main cast. Some recurring characters would develop as the seasons passed, in interesting and sometimes shocking turns. But let us start from the beginning with the main cast. Nana Visitor played Major Kira Nerys, the liaison officer from Bajor. She was the second in command at Deep Space Nine. Before this show, Visitor had been acting since the 1970s, with various roles on stage, screen, and television. I'll be honest, before Deep Space Nine, I had only seen her in two roles. The first was a nut job in an episode of Night Court, and the other was as the love interest in a failed TV pilot called The Spirit, based on Will Eisner's famous comic strip character. Both of these roles were, well, over the top. I remember when I saw the promotional materials for that show and thinking to myself, oh man, this character is going to be a caricature. Boy, was I wrong. Visitor played Kira as a strong-willed and deeply spiritual person. She was a former freedom fighter who fought to seek justice for her people. At first, Kira was aggressive and resentful of Sisko, but as time went on, she began to learn from him. He was able to help her channel her anger in more productive ways. Nerys would also eventually learn to become more emotionally vulnerable and would fall in love with Odo. She would also frequently interact with one of the show's main villains, Gul Dukat, played by Mark Alimo. I really enjoyed the episodes between these two characters. Dukat was incredibly charming, and was an imposing figure who served as the face of the Cardassian occupation. Kira was one of the leaders of the resistance during the war, so they had a long history of fighting with each other. Visitor and Alemo both brought this complexity to the relationship between their characters. The late Rene Auberjonois played the mysterious and grouchy chief of security, Odo. Renee had a legendary career in theater, film, and television. Odo was a changeling, a mysterious race of shapeshifters. His origins would wind up becoming a huge plotline not only in Deep Space Nine, but also the entire Star Trek universe. Odo excelled at his job in security. He was smart and very perceptive of the nature of those around him. This made him a great interrogator and detective. During the occupation, Odo was recruited by Gul Dukat. At that time, Odo was known for being a mediator with the Bajorans on the station. For many years, he was respected and called a hero by Bajor. Yet even though he was an ally to the Bajorans, he was not perfect, as it was revealed that his careless actions caused the death of 3 innocent men. Odo was investigating the attempted murder of Gul Dukat. At the time, his methods were to focus on order and efficiency, so he didn't dig any deeper into the incident, and he arrested 3 men with circumstantial evidence. The result was that they would end up being executed for a crime that they didn't commit. This would change Odo forever, and he did everything he could to avoid this horrible mistake from ever happening again. The creation of Odo is an interesting story. As I stated previously, Deep Space Nine was based on the idea of a western town in space. So like any western, a sheriff was needed, and in typical Star Trek fashion, it would be a character who's an outsider and observer of humanity. Deep Space Nine creator Michael B. Piller had this to say about Odo, quote, "Odo is the curmudgeon of all curmudgeons. So instead of Data, who worships humanity and wants to be that, and Spock, who would deny it, Odo has been forced to pass as a humanoid all of his life, to look like us and act like us, because it's a lot more socially acceptable, and he resents it. So he has now found a way to use it as a defense mechanism, and keep a distance from it, and find ways to be critical of the human condition." The original design of Odo was very different. Originally, he was very muscular and intimidating, because the concept of Odo was like a Star Trek Clint Eastwood. But all that changed when Rene Auberjonois was cast. Obviously, now that Rene was Odo, he couldn't use physical intimidation like, let's say, Worf could. Instead, Odo had to use his intelligence and natural authoritative personality to keep order on the station. Some of the best aspects of the show were the interactions between Odo and Quark. In fact, during his audition, Rene was told that no one had performed the role with the level of anger that they were looking for. So Auberjonois walked in, yelled, "Quark!" and the rest, as they say, is history. This dynamic between them was a tribute to Casablanca. The characters would have a relationship much like Rick and Renault did in that movie. Even if they were on screen for just a few minutes, whenever Rene Auberjonois and Armin Shimerman had a scene together, you knew you were in for a good time. Rene and Armin became very close because they both had their makeup done at the same time. The prosthetics took hours to be applied, which gave them time to deeply bond. This bond would extend to their families as well, growing so close that when Rene passed away in 2019, Armin posted on Twitter the following message: "It is with great heartache and loss I share with you the passing of dear, dear Rene Auberjonois. His last message to me was entitled, 'Don't forget. I know that I, Kitty, and all that knew him will never forget. The world seems noticeably emptier now. I loved him.'" Armin Shimerman will always be associated with the Ferengi, and it's not just Quark. Shimerman was one of the original actors who first wore the infamous ears. In the Next Generation episode that first introduced the Ferengi in the Star Trek universe, The Last Post, Armin played the Ferengi villain named Letek. He has said that he felt his performance ruined the Ferengi for years, that the episode and his portrayal were both a disaster. In an interview for GameStop, Shimerman said about playing the original Ferengi, "I didn't put it behind me for years. It was like the sword of Damocles hanging over my head. All of my work on Deep Space Nine for the first 4 seasons was me trying to eradicate that original performance from everyone's mind. It was my agenda to rectify the mistake I made, to take a one-dimensional character and make him a 3-dimensional character." Armin Shimerman became close with all the other actors who played his fellow Ferengi, like Max Grodenchik as Quark's brother Rom, and Aaron Eisenberg as Nog, Quark's nephew and Rom's son. In fact, whenever they were going to be in an episode, they would all come over the Scheiberman's house to practice their scenes. This invitation would also be extended to guest stars that played fellow Ferengis. Both Rom and Nog would become fan favorites of the show. Nog, in particular, would become the first Ferengi in the Federation. One of my favorite episodes that featured all three of them was Little Green Men, which revolved around them accidentally time-traveling to Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. One of my favorite moments in that episode was when their universal translators stopped working.
Welcome to Earth. We mean you no harm. Did you understand a word of that?
But Aaron Eisenberg's favorite episode was It's Only a Paper Moon. This Season 7 episode revolved around Nog dealing with an injury that left him disabled during a fight against the Dominion. Eisenberg said that he was approached by many veterans who said that they identified with this episode. This meant a lot to him.
I can't tell you how many times a veteran has come up to me and they would say, that show helped me. It helped me when I came back. It helped me get through, whatever the individual was dealing with. And that's powerful.
Sadly, Aaron passed on September 21st, 2019 with heart failure. He was a husband, father, and dear friend to many in the Star Trek community. He is still missed by fans who were blessed enough to meet him. Jadzia Dax was played by the stunning Terry Farrell. The character of Dax was created on the show because they wanted to have another alien species that had been featured on Next Generation. So the Trill were chosen, although some alterations had to be made. The look of the Trill was drastically changed since it made Farrell look unattractive. This revision would be extended to the entire appearance of the Trill alien race. The Dax in Jadzia Dax was an alien symbiote that had lived many lifetimes through its various hosts. Each new host would possess the memories of the previous lives, including that of Benjamin Sisko's friend and mentor, Kirsten Dax. So Benjamin nicknamed Jadzia Old Man. But the writers would wind up having a difficult time nailing down the character. How do you write a character that has lived so many lifetimes? It became frustrating not only for the writers, but for Farrell as well. She said that at first they told her to play Jadzia as a cross between Grace Kelly and Yoda. But then they would write scripts with Jadzia contradicting the Kelly-Yoda concept. Terry Farrell pointed to a scene in an episode of Season 1 where Dax begins to gossip about people on the station dating each other. She said, quote, "Why would a 350-year-old person care about who you're going out with?" But many point to writer-producer Ira Behr as to how Jadzia's character was finally developed. In Season 2, Ira was able to establish her as a rogue/adventurer. Jadzia was smart, insightful, and ready for anything life had in store for her. But Dax would be involved in another Star Trek tradition, being the focal point in a groundbreaking episode of television history. In the episode Rejoined, Dax encounters Lenara Khan, the widow of one of Dax's former hosts. They would soon realize that they still had feelings for each other. This was taboo in Trill culture. In their society, joined Trills are not supposed to rekindle romantic relationships with people that were involved with former hosts. Harkening back to the groundbreaking kiss in the Star Trek original series episode Plato's Stepchildren, the episode Rejoined would also share another groundbreaking kiss, this time in one of TV's first lesbian kisses. It was a step forward to having LGBTQ representation in science fiction. This is Terry Farrell's favorite episode, and says that to this day she's still approached by people from the LGBTQ community who have told her that this episode made them feel like they were not alone and that it inspired them. Chief Medical Officer Julian Bashir was played by Alexander Siddiq, who was picked for the role by show creator Rick Berman. Originally, Berman wanted him to play Sisko, but he realized he was far too young for the role, so he decided to make him the Doctor instead. According to Siddiq, Bashir was a blank canvas, and the only description that was given in the show Bible and the script of the pilot was human male in his mid-20s, may have an accent depending on casting, and wide-shouldered with a boyish face, trying to appear confident. The character's name wasn't even originally Julian Bashir. It was Julian Amoros, which would be changed to Bashir right before filming. At first, Bashir was not well liked by the fans, mostly because he was written as arrogant and could be pretty annoying at times. Eventually, it was revealed that Bashir had been genetically enhanced as a child. In the Star Trek universe, genetic augmentation is illegal because of the villain Khan Noonien Singh, so it made sense that someone so smart could also be, well, so stupid. For a while, the show kept pushing a romance between Bashir and Dax, but it just never worked out. Siddiq said that he always felt that Dax was out of his league, so Bashir would wind up being a bit of a playboy, having many relationships, some that would last longer than others. But it was the behind-the-scenes romance that would be the most memorable for Alexander. You see, Siddiq and Nana Visitor would eventually become involved and get married. Not only that, but when Visitor became pregnant, they incorporated it into the show in a clever way. In the episode Body Parts, that involved Bashir having to transplant the fetus of Miles O'Brien's wife Keiko into Kira's body. However, many Deep Space Nine fans agree that the best relationship Julian had was with Garak. Andrew Robinson played the former spy turned tailor, Aleem Garak. Garak was only supposed to be a guest star, but he was so popular that they kept bringing him back. He was a former spy who had worked for a Cardassian intelligence agency called the Obsidian Order. His past was a mystery, but we do know he somehow got exiled from his homeworld. We never really get a straight answer as to why he was banished, but many theories have been thrown around. But if you think about it, it really doesn't matter. You see, Garak was like Schrodinger's cat. It was best to not risk letting the cat die. Robinson wonderfully played this mischievous mastermind who could charm you while stabbing you in the back. There are so many great Bashir and Garak moments that I could not name them all, so I will pick just one. It was when Julian told Garak the story of the boy who cried wolf. When he finishes, he tells Garak that the moral of the story is that if you lie so much, no one will believe you when you tell the truth. Garak just replies,
Are you sure that's the point, Doctor? Of course. What else could it be?
That you should never tell the same lie twice.
Over the years, fans have speculated about Garak's sexuality. Many have felt that there was an attraction between Julian and Garak. In an interview for Amazon, Robinson addressed the topic, saying, quote, I started playing Garak as someone who doesn't have a defined sexuality. He's not gay, he's not straight, it's a non-issue for him. Basically, his sexuality is inclusive. Both Robinson and Ira said that they wished they could have explored this facet of the character, but were restricted by the network. Miles O'Brien was the chief of operations on DS9, played by Irish actor Cole Meany. Meany is a legend and has appeared in so many classic film roles. My personal favorite was his role as the Irish ward boss Mike Kelly in Ron Howard's Far and Away. O'Brien was a character that originated in Next Generation as the transporter chief of the Enterprise. I always thought it was a brilliant idea to move this character from Next Generation to Deep Space Nine. Miles was a well-liked character by fans of Next Generation, and I feel like it was a way for the Next Gen fandom to give a show like Deep Space Nine a chance. Miles was the everyman of this show. He was a blue-collar guy who was constantly running around keeping things from breaking down in the station. But it was his relationship with his wife that was my favorite part of his character. When I first watched the show, many of my friends had crushes on either Kira or Dax. But mine was Keiko. I mean, look at her. That smile could melt an iceberg. There are many marriages on TV that I always admired and hoped that I would have in the future. The top two being Paul and Jamie from Mad About You, and the one between Miles and Keiko O'Brien. They weren't perfect. At times they would make mistakes and argue, but they were always there for each other. After rewatching the show, I think Miles is probably the one character on Deep Space Nine that was constantly being traumatized. This poor man was regularly being tortured both mentally and physically. One time he even died. Producer Ira Bear joked that every year, in at least one episode a season, they would make Miles' life miserable. The reason was because they knew the audience would feel bad for him. There was one aspect of O'Brien's life that was very important to the writers and producers on the show. the friendship between him and Bashir. Many people consider their friendship one of the most organic in the series. At first, O'Brien found Julian annoying, but this would evolve into a deep friendship. It was very interesting to slowly see that friendship develop over time. Jake Sisko was the son of Commander and later Captain Benjamin Sisko, played by Cirroc Lofton. It took a while for Lofton and the writers to get comfortable with Jake's role on the show. The writers didn't want to create a boy genius like Will Crusher. Instead, they wanted to focus on a more realistic take on a kid stuck on a space station. I think they did a great job, portraying a child who was just trying to find himself in a place that limited his options as a kid. Remember, this was not like the Enterprise. This was a way station where people never stayed for very long. It was his friendship with Nog that prevented Jake from feeling truly alone. Behind the scenes, Lofton and Aaron Eisenberg became very close, and wound up co-hosting the excellent Star Trek podcast, The Seventh Rule. Jake's development on the show also went in a direction I did not expect. I thought, like many fans, that Jake would eventually join the Federation in a role such as an engineer. Instead, Jake would become a writer. Not just a journalist, but eventually becoming a novelist. The two episodes that showcase this aspect of the character were Nor the Battle to the Strong and The Visitor, both of which are incredible episodes which I suggest you watch. But the most important part of this character is his relationship with his father. Avery Brooks felt that it was incredibly important to showcase a healthy and close father-son relationship. He felt that there were too many examples of strained relationships between African-American fathers and sons, so he wanted to portray what a healthy one looks like. Brooks and Lofton would become incredibly close. Avery would take him to basketball games with his family, and even introduce him as his son to people. He would invite him to family events, and they remain close to this very day. Finally, let us talk about yet another legendary captain in the Star Trek universe, Benjamin Sisko, played by Avery Brooks. Avery was a critically acclaimed stage actor who transitioned into television and film. One of his most memorable roles before Star Trek was that as Hawk in Spencer for Hire. Ironically, it was because of this show that Paramount refused to let him shave his head, as they said they didn't want him to be confused for Hawk. I'm glad that they reversed this decision in later seasons, because I always thought he looked like a badass with that bald head and goatee. When he was told by his agent to audition for the role of Sisko, Brooks thought the part would be that of an alien, which would more than likely involve a lot of makeup. But when he found out what the role was, he was pessimistic regarding his chances of getting it. He thought the minute he would walk into the audition, the producers would see he wasn't the right fit for Sisko. In fact, on the day of the audition, Avery's car broke down, and he was shocked when the producers rescheduled him. Benjamin Sisko is my second favorite captain in the Star Trek universe. He was smart, kind, and a badass. His backstory was also fascinating. In the pilot episode, we learned that Ben is a survivor of the infamous Battle of Wolf 359, where a possessed Picard attacked a fleet of starships. Calling himself Locutus, Picard led the Borg on a battle that would kill hundreds. During the battle, Sisko lost his wife and almost quit Starfleet, until he was given the assignment of running Deep Space Nine, which he tried to decline but wound up promising to only be there briefly, before a replacement would take over. But during his few days there, Ben learned that he was adept at handling the complicated situations in the Bajoran government. Benjamin discovers the Prophets, and is named by the Bajorans as emissary of the Prophets. This made him realize that quitting Starfleet was his way of avoiding his grief, and that he was destined to work at Deep Space Nine. The first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine were pretty rough. Don't get me wrong, there were some great, if not amazing episodes, but there were also a lot of stinkers. It was not until Season 3 that things began to turn around. The Dominion began to take center stage as the main antagonist of the show. It's probably one of the most popular storylines in Star Trek, next to the Borg in Next Generation. However, it almost didn't happen. When executive producer Ira Behr and writer Royal D. Moore approached Rick Berman about the Dominion War, Berman was incredibly resistant. In an interview on TrekWeb.com, Bear commented that Berman once said that he thought the Dominion War episodes were, quote, too violent and depressing, to which Bear replied, quote, "It's a war. What do you mean it's too violent?" In a Salon.com interview, Bear also said that he had to negotiate to get to the Dominion War. Rick Berman wanted it to be over in 4 episodes. This was because Berman had always pushed for self-contained stories in Star Trek. Looking back, this is very obvious for every Dominion episode. There are at least 3 that were self-contained. Ira said that if he could go back in time and had his way, he would have made it more serialized. Still, what we got was awesome. We found out the group behind the Dominion, the founders, were Odo's people, the Changelings. Worf would join DS9 to help fight the war, and we got one of the most badass starships in the Federation, the USS Defiant. I still remember the episode where I first saw the Defiant and was blown away. You see, starships in Star Trek all fought the same way in battle. It was always phaser beams and a few photon torpedoes that were shot at a time. But with the Defiant, it was like watching a space machine gun. It also had a cloaking device, which Federation ships were prevented from having. Seeing that in battle was always my favorite part of the Dominion War episodes. Speaking of changes, Michael Dorn would join the cast as Worf in Season 4. This was a bit of a sore subject for the cast. Not that they didn't like Michael Dorn, they enjoyed working with him. But the fact that one of the most popular characters from Next Generation was injected into Deep Space Nine gave the impression that Paramount did not believe in the show. I have to agree. I never liked that Worf was suddenly on DS9. It just came out of nowhere and felt very jarring. Rewatching the show, I do think he had a lot of great episodes. And his relationship with Dax was nice. I still don't think that they should have gotten married though. Sadly, I would never find out if I would change my mind on that pairing, because Terry Farrell would leave the show at the end of Season 6. The reason for her not coming back for the final season was a sad and frustrating one. Farrell said that the entire reason she didn't come back was because of one man, Rick Berman. If you know anything about the behind the scenes of Star Trek, you will know that Rick Berman has been difficult to work with. Will Wheaton has talked about Berman at length in his most recent memoir, Still Just a Geek. Farrell said that Berman was a misogynist and a bully. When Season 6 was ending, Terry's contract was up, and she requested to do fewer episodes, which Berman balked at.
The last season, when I was told by one of our producers that I was really lucky to be there and I really should sign the next contract, because if I weren't there on the set, I'd be at Kmart. That was the last straw for me.
So Terry would quit and got herself a role on Ted Danson's latest sitcom at the time, Becker. Berman says that Farrell begged to be let go of her contract because she felt the show was hurting her career and wanted to work on other non-Trek roles. In my opinion, with his history, I would not put much stock in Rick Berman's explanations. So in the finale of Season 6, Dax would be killed and a new character was created, Lieutenant Junior Grade Ezri Dax, played by Nicole DeBoer. I enjoyed Ezri. She was the station's counselor and had an interesting backstory. Ezri did not want to join with Dax, but did so because the symbiote was going to die, and there was no one else at the time that was a Trill. This was very traumatic to Ezri, since she struggled to ingratiate herself into 8 lifetimes of memories. This is why she went to Deep Space Nine to meet Sisko, since 2 of her hosts were friends with him. Nicole DeBoer had excellent chemistry with the cast, especially with Alexander Siddiq, which was great because Ezri and Bashir would eventually fall in love. Deep Space Nine had so many great episodes throughout the series. Too many for me to name, but here are a few of my favorites. Duet, which could have been a stage play, House of Quark, which was an excellent Quark episode, The Visitor, an emotional episode that will pull at your heartstrings, and Far Beyond the Stars, which had some amazing performances with one particular scene that the cast still talk about amongst themselves. Many people still think that Deep Space Nine was cancelled, but that was not the case. You see, it became a rule that Star Trek shows would only have 7 seasons. This goes back to Star Trek The Next Generation, which only had 7. Star Trek Voyager also had 7 seasons, and Enterprise was supposed to have 7 as well before UPN canceled the show. As for whether or not Deep Space Nine should come back, I think that Picard Season 3 and to some extent Strange New Worlds have proven that previous Star Trek shows can still work. In the documentary What We Left Behind, an 8-season pilot is proposed by Ira and the rest of the writers. The proposal was very intriguing. I would like to have seen where they would have gone with it. But so far, Deep Space Nine has only returned in the excellent animated show Star Trek Lower Decks, which had an episode featuring Kira and Quark that had probably one of the most hilarious jokes in the entire series. You can currently see Deep Space Nine among many other Star Trek shows on Paramount+, and hopefully will soon be remastered in HD. It's ironic that at the time many fans hated this show for being such a departure from classic Star Trek, but now it's one of the most loved Star Trek shows. I normally end these episodes with a sweet line about how special the show was for me, but I think I'm going to let the late great Rene Auberjonois talk about how much Deep Space Nine has meant to him.
Well, at least now in my obituary, it's not going to say best known as Clayton Endicott III on Benson, because he was a wonderful, funny character, but he was a nitwit. And so now, what can I say? I don't know what else to say.
I'm Jesse Shade speaking on behalf of David Arroyo for JoBlo.com, and thanks again for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the JoBlo Originals channel. Tell all your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We are an independent company that appreciates all of your support, and we will see you next time on the next episode of Gone, But Not Forgotten.